Hello dear friends, my name is Clive Thompson. $184 silver? You must be thinking this is clickbait. Well, stay with me and I'll show you how I get to that number. You might arrive at a different number when you see the maths, but it is possible that silver could go to this figure literally overnight. And how is that possible? Well, I'm going to explain to you how this could happen. But let's start with the catalyst. What's the catalyst for such a move? So the real problem that we have with the United States at the moment is the huge value of the debt. There's a massive amount of debt coming due in the next 4 years, which has to be rolled over at much higher interest rates than previously. This can't continue indefinitely. It's not possible to continue taking on debt indefinitely without any consequences. Something has to be done. Let's look at something which is being considered by the United States, and that is the revaluation of gold. And I'm going to talk about that and why we see it. So let's start with the position of Secretary to the Treasury in the United States. It's the most important position in the country when it comes to managing the finances of the United States. Based on the amount of money being managed, it's a position which is many times more important than Jerome Powell's position as head of the Federal Reserve. Secretary of the Treasury is literally the most important position in the United States when it comes to finance. So Scott Bessent is the current Secretary to the Treasury. He succeeded Janet Yellen. Scott Bessent was sworn in as Secretary to the Treasury on January the 28th, 2025 this year. A few days later, in his new position as Secretary to the Treasury, he said the following words, and I quote, "We're going to monetize the asset side of the US balance sheet for the American people." Now, what does that mean? Well, for those who understand what the balance sheet is and what assets are, there's one asset he must be talking about, at least everybody thinks so, and that is the most liquid and the most undervalued asset on the Treasury's balance sheet. And that asset is 261.5 million ounces of gold, which is valued by the Treasury at the statutory price of $42.22. That's a price which was set by law in 1972. So those 261.5 million ounces at $42.22 are worth $11 billion. So the questions everybody's asking, and I'll come back to all these questions shortly, but I'll read the questions out. 1, when will it happen? 2, what will be the new gold price? 3, how will it happen? 4, will they take my gold just like they did in 1933? Will they confiscate it? Don't forget, 1934, 1 year after they confiscated people's gold, they raised the price from $20 to $35 an ounce, an increase of 69% in one night. How will it affect the price of silver and other precious metals? Now that's what you want to hear about, and I'm going to talk about that. I'm going to tell you how I get to my $184 price. Will it cause a collapse in the currency and massive inflation? So I'm going to break these questions down for you one by one. Let's start with the first question. When will it happen? Well, there's not going to be any official warning. Those who are in the know will be sworn to secrecy. However, as is always the case, there will be many people involved in the planning, and the secret is bound to leak out. Someone will tell their partner will tell their dad, the dad will tell his mates at the next barbecue, and so on. And of course, dad's mates are all going to pile into gold. Pretty soon, there'll be a large group of people in the know who were never supposed to know. But you won't know, except you're hearing it here. You won't know when. Your only warning sign will be a rapidly rising gold price without any apparent reason. There'll be no accompanying story, no wars, no surge in inflation, no default. But the question is still when. Well, the button's likely to be pushed when the economy needs a stimulus, or it could be pushed when some emergency action is needed due to some event, such as a Liz Truss moment. Liz Truss moment in the UK was a bond crisis, a gilts crisis, so it might be a crisis in the US Treasury market. The second question is, what will be the new gold price? Well, we've heard all kinds of figures, from the current price of $3,300 all the way up to $150,000. The most popular quoted figure is $20,000 an ounce. I have my reason to think that's probably going to be a little bit too high. I think the figure will be $15,000 an ounce. It's a guess. I don't have inside information. But $15,000 is about 4.5 times higher than today's price of $3,300. Now, each price has its pros and its cons. But any price, from the present price of $3,300 all the way up to the highest possible figure, is going to create a profit for the Treasury, and it's also going to create a lot of newly printed cash for the Treasury if it's done right, yet allowing the Treasury to keep the gold. And I'm going to describe in a minute how, with a little bit of accounting magic, the Treasury can create trillions of dollars of newly spendable money, which can eliminate the budget deficit for the next 2 years, can reduce government debt, and allow the Treasury to keep its gold. And that absolutely is possible. So we'll just look at how much cash will be created for the Treasury depending on what price they choose for the revalued price of gold. Now, if they choose to revalue it from the $42.22 statutory price to today's price of $3,300, very roughly. I mean, that might be a bit more, a bit less when you watch this. But that's the price today, 1st of August 2025. If they valued $3,300, the revaluation would create around $863 billion for the Treasury. Now, that might sound a lot of money, but unfortunately it's not even enough to pay off this year's budget deficit, so it won't go very far in reducing the debt at all. Let's take another price, this time $15,000 an ounce. Now, that's the price I'm thinking of. Now, that would generate $3.9 trillion. That's enough money to pay off this year's budget deficit, turn it into a surplus, and also make a surplus next year. And it would be enough to pay off maturing debt over the 6 to 9 months. So government debt would go down. But some people say, well, why not? Why $15,000? Why stop there? Why not $150,000, which would generate $39 trillion? And that would be enough to repay the whole of the national debt. There's a little problem with that, because the national debt has maturity dates, and until it matures, you can't pay it off. But it's a fair comment. Why not $150,000? But in my case, I'm going to go for the $15,000 an ounce. I'm not against the most popular number of $20,000, which would generate $5.2 trillion, but I find that figure a little bit adventurous, and it might have unintended consequences. So that's why I've gone for a slightly lower level of $15,000 an ounce. So next question, how will it happen? Well, it's a simple 4-step process which will be undertaken to make it happen. Let's go through these steps one by one. One thing which is held by the Federal Reserve is something called a gold certificate. Gold certificates are an IOU from the Treasury to the Federal Reserve. It's an accounting receipt, not a claim for physical gold. It's the Federal Reserve has got the gold. So back in 1934, the Federal Reserve owned the gold, but by the Gold Reserve Act, which was organized by President Roosevelt at the time, the Federal Reserve was forced to sell all its gold to the Treasury at the market price of well, back then it was $35, and it received in exchange the gold certificate, which you'll see on the Federal Reserve's balance sheet today, valued at exactly 11, or give or take, $11 trillion.